Hey guys, so in today's video, let's talk about living paycheck to paycheck. Now, if you are completely new to my channel, you may not know that I used to live paycheck to paycheck, whereby I was spending every single penny I made. And so I want to talk about my story in terms of how I actually used to spend my money and what I then did to overcome that so that I could stop living paycheck to paycheck and I could start saving and investing my money much more consistently. So grab a tea or a coffee and let's maybe have a chat and talk about some of the things that I ended up doing to stop me from living paycheck to paycheck. So first of all, let's talk about my finances a few years ago and what they're essentially like. And I think especially if you are maybe new to my channel or you're just new to like learning about personal finance and my journey, you might think that I have always been like a-okay with money. Like I've always been able to manage my money well. And yes, I'm at that point now, but I was not there a few years ago. So if I just share what my finances were like a few years ago, and this started in uni, that is when I essentially started living paycheck to paycheck, because obviously when you're in uni, you're kind of broke anyway. And I did have a part-time job in my final year of university, but that money was going nowhere. Actually, no, tell a lie, that money was pretty much spent on booking holidays. And also at uni, I'd basically maxed out my overdraft. And after university, it took me a while to actually find a job, but I was able to start working. But even during that year, I did not pay off my overdraft one bit. To be honest, I didn't really want to yet because it was interest free. So at that time, my overdraft wasn't charging me any fees. So I thought that I had loads of time to pay off my overdraft. And when I start working properly and getting that money, I'll be able to pay off my overdraft. When in reality, that never really happened, to be honest. So fast forward a year later, and I decided that I was going to go back to university to do my master's. And when I was doing my master's, I then realized that again, I did not have money to now start overpaying on my overdraft. And so because I was a student again, do you know what I did? I ended up going back to my bank to say, look, I'm a student again, so could you like have a look at my overdraft and basically give me another student overdraft? And they were able to do that because I was a postgraduate student. And so it meant that I would have more time to pay off my overdraft. And again, in my eyes, I was thinking, okay, once I actually finish my master's and I get my new graduate job, I'll have money coming in and then I'll be able to pay off my overdraft very, very easily. And so because that's what I was thinking, that's essentially what I did. So during the time of my master's, I did not pay back a single penny of my overdraft. But then when I first got my graduate job, I didn't really end up paying my overdraft either. So I was essentially then actually having my income, but I was spending so much money that I did not have money to now start paying on my overdraft. And so my overdraft was still maxed out when I actually started my graduate job. And so when I started this new graduate job, I ended up moving out of my parents' house because it was too far to commute. And also where my work was, it was very hard to take public transport. So essentially you kind of had to drive to your workplace. And when I would be driving, I had my old little Peugeot that I basically bought at university, and I'd had that for years. I took that car and drove that to my workplace. And literally within the first week, I just felt so embarrassed because everyone else had these nice cars and I didn't. I felt like I had like this old itty bitty car which was basically breaking down very soon anyway, and I just felt like I was at a point where I shouldn't really be driving this kind of car because, you know, I'm a working girl now and obviously I'm seeing everyone else driving all these nice cars. And so what did I do? I decided to actually get a new car, but I didn't have any savings to buy a car, and I didn't even have enough money to give a big deposit to also buy a car either. So I then had to get my car on finance with a kind of small deposit, and then I would end up having to pay a monthly payment for the next 4 years for this car, not realizing that this same car will be depreciating in value every single year I held it. So here I am in this new graduate job where I have consistent income coming in, but I'm making car payments. I don't even have enough money to be paying on my overdraft, and I'm literally just spending money on anything and everything. I was just spending my money and I literally had no savings. So even though I had much more money now that I was working compared to being a student, I still felt broke because I was essentially spending every single paycheck. And so if you also know my story, then you would know that I ended up having about £16,000 worth of debt, which is maybe around $20,000 worth of debt, because I still had my maxed out overdraft, which was about $2,000, and then I also had my car loan, which was about $14,000. And for me, I didn't actually realize that I was basically living paycheck to paycheck, and I was pretty much living beyond my means until I did my first net worth statement. And if you don't know what a net worth statement is, it's basically your assets minus your liabilities. So your assets are going to be things that you own. So for example, if you've got any savings or investments, or if you've got equity in your house, for example, that's going to be considered an asset, whereas the liability are things that you owe. So if you owe something to maybe like a creditor, for example, that is considered a liability. So for example, an overdraft could be a liability, credit card debt, any other personal loans or any car loans, those would be considered liabilities. And so when I did my first net worth statement and saw that I had no assets whatsoever, so I had no savings, no investments, nothing like that, but I had all of these liabilities where I had my car loan and my overdraft, that's when it really hit me that I was essentially living paycheck to paycheck. And honestly, it was going to be a struggle to build wealth if I didn't start changing my habits around money. So now that you know my story, I actually want to talk through some of the things I did to help me stop living paycheck to paycheck to the point where I am now financially secure and I'm pretty much on the way to financial independence. But I wouldn't have been able to do that without actually changing some of my habits when it comes to money management. So let's talk about some of those things now. Okay, so one of the first things I did to stop living paycheck to paycheck is finally deciding that enough was enough. And what I mean by this is I had to make the decision that I need to change and something needs to change. And I think for me, from a faith perspective, I did feel like God was telling me like, you need to sort yourself out. I'm not gonna lie. And I realized that if I didn't decide to change my habits or the way I view money, that this was gonna have an impact on my future. And especially when I now start to think about having a family, I didn't want to get to the point where I'm still living paycheck to paycheck, worrying what I'm gonna do if I then lose my job and I can't afford to pay my bills. And so one of the things that helped me to realize that enough was enough was understanding my why. Like, why did I want to first pay off my debt? Why did I want to stop living paycheck to paycheck? And why did I now want to start focusing more on my finances? And some of the things I realized is that I didn't want to have to really rely and depend on my employer in order to pay my bills. I didn't want to have to be at the mercy of my employer to make sure that I have some financial security. And I say this because during the time my company had been laying off employees like that. They would go through restructures every couple of years and they would just make people redundant, meaning that they would now have to go and find another job. And I asked myself, what if that happened to me? Because I'd been made redundant before. I'd been made redundant when I actually had my first job after university. So because I've gone through that experience, I then had to ask myself, look, if I was made redundant today, how on earth am I going to afford this new car payment? How am I going to afford to pay my rent? How am I going to afford to pay my other bills? And so that was one of the biggest things that really drove me to now start making a change, because if I continued to live the way that I was, I would be in trouble if, for example, I got laid off. One of the other things that was a big why for me is because I didn't really want to work for an employer for another 40 plus years. It's just not something I want to do. One of the biggest things I noticed is that in my company, for example, I would see senior leaders bending over backwards and working such long hours to make sure that their work was actually completed on time. And I felt like I just didn't want that, because some of those senior leaders wouldn't even be able to pick their kids up from school, or they wouldn't be able to even see them at bedtime because they were working such long hours. And I didn't want that for myself. I wanted to be able to get to a point where, yes, I may have a family, but I can actually pick them up from school, or I can go and see their school shows, for example, or I could simply be there for their bedtime story. I wanted to have that opportunity, and I felt like if I continued again in my position and I did nothing, I would get to the point where I would have no choice because I'm depending on my employer to pay my bills, that I would then have to actually be at the mercy of the employer and then still continue to work those long hours because I have no choice. I did not want that for myself. And so for me, I realized that enough was enough and I wanted to change my finances because I wanted to make sure that I could create a future for myself whereby I am no longer dependent on my employer. Now, the next thing I did is I actually learned how to save. Now, as someone who is a natural spender who was so used to living paycheck to paycheck and spending her whole paycheck, you would think that saving money would probably be the complete opposite of maybe what I'm able to do. But actually, learning how to save was one of the biggest things that helped me to not only stop living paycheck to paycheck, but to also pay off my debt in about 18 months, and then to also become financially secure by having savings like an emergency fund and also starting to invest for my financial future. And so I'm a really big advocate of knowing how to save because that can actually help you in so many different areas when it comes to your finances. And when it comes to saving money, I'm not gonna lie to you, it took me a while to learn how to save and how to do it properly. But I'm telling you, if you continue to do it and you don't give up, that can actually help you, whether it comes to paying off debt, whether it comes to saving up for an emergency fund or a house deposit, or even learning how to invest. I would say that when it comes to saving money, it's not about just putting money in a bank account. When it comes to saving money, you now start to change yourself because now you're thinking, actually, I'm going to prioritize myself when it comes to my finances first, and then I'm going to deal with everyone else later. So whether you put that savings into your debt, or you put that savings into a future house deposit, or you actually use those savings to now start investing, just learning how to save can actually change your financial future, and it's one of the biggest reasons as to why I was able to stop living paycheck to paycheck. Now, the first thing I did to stop living paycheck to paycheck was to continuously think about my end destination. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Auntie V, that's a little bit weird. What are you really talking about? And what I mean is that even when it came to paying off debt, that wasn't my end destination. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we tend to miss. And I always harp on my clients, asking them, what else are you working towards and why? So for me personally, because I had debt, yes, that was something that I was working towards. So I was working towards paying that off. But really and truly, the reason why I was doing that is because I wanted to become financially independent in the future. And what I mean by financial independence is basically having investments, paying for my other expenses, so paying for my lifestyle, so that I don't necessarily have to work in order to pay my bills. I could have assets, so things putting money in my pocket to help pay for my bills, so that I have the option to do what I want to do when I want to do it. And so because that was partly my end destination, what I then said to myself is, okay, in order for me to become financially independent, one of the things I need to do is overpay on my debt. Another thing I might need to do is create an emergency fund. And another thing I might need to do is start learning to invest so that I can then invest in assets to then help me become financially independent. So as you can see, these were all steps that I decided to go through. So yes, the debt was a big thing that I needed to pay off, but it wasn't the only step. And I think this is one of the things that we tend to miss. And it's always something that I have to try and really get clear with my clients, because yes, saving up for the house deposit is great, but once you get the house, what else are you going to be doing? What next? What are you actually planning to do over the next few years? And what do you need to do today to help you get to that end destination? Now, if you're maybe someone who realizes that you were in a similar position to me, maybe you've got that consistent income coming in, but for some reason you find yourself still living paycheck to paycheck, even though technically you should be able to save money or you should be able to start investing your money, but you have no idea what's going on and you have no idea where your money is going, then make sure you do check out my one-on-one coaching, because what I can do is really help you to now start understanding exactly where your money is going, so that not only you can have more savings, but you can also start investing for your financial future, so that you can actually have a solid retirement and work towards financial independence. So make sure you do check that out if you haven't already. What you can do is just book a free sales call just to find out more about working with me. So I'll link more information up here for you and in the description below. But I hope this really highlights that even though you may be living paycheck to paycheck or just pretty much just spending your whole paycheck paycheck and you have no idea why, you can change and you can be able to save much more consistently and even start investing for your future. But it really starts with you, and you now have to decide whether enough is enough and then take the action to start saving more and to also be able to actually realize where your end destination is so you can continuously work towards that. And so I hope that by sharing my story, you can now start to see that it is possible to change, because if I can do it, then I have faith that you can do it too. So if you did like this video, then please do give me a thumbs up if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments what's one reason why you really don't want to live paycheck to paycheck. I do post every Tuesday, so if you would like to know more, then of course you can subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys next week.